Relative motion versus orientation. This is one of the concepts in physical fitness and performance that I think doesn't get enough time or respect from myself historically and from other people. Relative motion versus orientation is effectively when you're talking about a joint or a human and the joints in the human system, things moving independently or as one. So you can see I'm doing the chest press here, and my humerus, my upper arm, is moving through flexion and extension relative to my axial skeleton. That is relative motion. And of course, being relative motion as opposed to motion, it is between one thing, one part of the body and another, versus orientation, which would be more of a turn. So the axial skeleton and the humerus moving together, say you just turn your entire body to one direction or the other. Now, why I think this is unrespected or missed out on is because you have to really pay attention to it in order to see it, and it's not something you can kind of haphazardly see or achieve. And I think we lose relative motions as we get older, and it's important to try and keep them in order to share the load across muscles, keep things moving nicely. And as we get stronger and stronger and lift more and more weights, the tendency is to reduce relative motion. And you want that. Force production at the highest levels means velocity is lower, and you want less relative motion in order to move more weights. You can think of the thick boys powerlifting. You don't want them to have a super supple spine. You don't want every vertebrae to be moving independently. You want those to be locked in place so you can produce as much force and push it through the ground to squat and deadlift, rather than it to be leaked out throughout the system and spread over. You want to lock the axial skeleton in place and just move the bar to achieve the highest ultimate external lift. Now, why I think it's such a big deal is because if you actually want to develop tissues, you need to take joints through a relative motion, because that's how you're going to eccentrically lengthen those tissues and concentrically shorten those tissues. And you'll see as my reps progress in a set, you'll see my body doesn't want to have relative motion. It wants to orientate or move as one. And this is just from the perspective of building muscle. It's super important. I'm here, I'm trying to get strong, trying to build muscle across different joints. And you'll see as I get closer, this is a good example, as I get close to this set, you'll see my axial skeleton, everything that's not my arms and my legs, trying to move with my arms and the legs more in order to compensate and take more of the load. So my tissues have to do less work. Effectively, my body's trying to be efficient. And sometimes we don't want that when we're trying to drive physical adaptations. Sometimes we want to use muscles that are tired and weak to squeeze every single drop of juice out of them. Particularly things like the neck. The neck just tenses up and doesn't move at all when you're lifting heavy. That's why you develop a thicker neck from lifting, just because of the tension requirements when you're trying to avoid relative motion. I think it's big in hypertrophy in particular because the humerus, scapula, clavicle relative to the rib cage in pushing and pulling movements will dictate the tissues that you're targeting. And people don't pay attention so much to the rib cage when they're lifting. But if the rib cage drops down, or angles up, you will be biasing a different part of those targeted tissues, consciously or not. But you probably want to take the joints through their full excursion in order to stimulate those tissues as much as possible. So see here, if I reach my sternum up and don't let my rib cage drop forward, I'll bias a different aspect of my traps and rhomboids that I might not if I just let my rib cage drop down. I think it plays a massive role in rehab as well. We might have inhibition in our central nervous system that avoids us loading particular areas, and therefore we just orientate those areas rather than actually producing some kind of relative motion in order to load those tissues, get them stronger, and share the load across more tissues, just because we might have that central nervous system inhibition. A little chat on relative motions versus orientations. If you have questions, drop them below. But I would say generally a misrespected, an under-respected concept. I see it a lot with like things like clamshells. People think they're loading the glute med, but really it's just like rotating through the lumbar spine or moving other things. It takes a lot of high focus to move the joints that you actually want to move. Hope you got some value. Hope you have a good day. Cheers. Bye.